Stop moving.
A cocaine pipeline from Texas to Maryland is now shut down after a months-long investigation.
At 1:56 a.m., the quiet outside a sprawling Texas oil estate shattered. This wasn't a ranch. This wasn't a drilling site. This was a multi-thousand-acre private estate owned by one of the most powerful oil executives in the state, a man whose name appeared on donor lists, advisory boards, and energy policy panels. And tonight, it was surrounded by FBI and ICE tactical teams. For more than a year, investigators had avoided this property entirely. No flyovers, no visible surveillance, no warrants, because on paper, everything was clean. The company paid taxes early. The estate passed inspections. The owner hosted fundraisers for state officials and energy committees. Nothing about the property suggested crime, until agents stopped looking at the surface. The investigation began hundreds of miles away, with drug seizures that didn't make sense. Massive quantities of cocaine and meth moving across the Southwest without the usual border signatures. No tunnels near the border, no stash houses, no intercepted convoys. Yet the drugs were everywhere. DEA analysts mapped the shipments backward through trucking routes, shell distributors, and fuel logistics companies. Over and over, the trails converged on one anomaly: an oil services firm headquartered in Texas. The firm didn't traffic drugs, it trafficked infrastructure. At 1:14 a.m., ground-penetrating radar was deployed on land adjacent to the estate under the cover of a geological survey. What it revealed forced federal command to halt everything else. Beneath the property ran a reinforced underground tunnel, not a short passage, not a storm shelter. A long-range corridor engineered with ventilation, power, and load-bearing supports sloped precisely to allow heavy carts to move unseen beneath the land. A tunnel designed to move weight. At 1:56 a.m., the order was given: storm the estate. Gates were breached quietly. Helicopters hovered just low enough to keep the property contained. FBI teams moved through the main residence while ICE units secured outbuildings and vehicle bays. Inside the house, everything looked exactly like it should: luxury, order, control, until agents found the access point, a hydraulic platform concealed beneath a polished stone floor in a private study. When it descended, it revealed a staircase leading into darkness. The air below was cool, filtered, maintained. This wasn't a hiding place. It was a supply artery. As agents moved through the tunnel, chemical sensors began to spike. Not residue, not traces, bulk narcotics. At 2:23 a.m., agents reached the first underground chamber, then the second, then the third. Stacked from floor to ceiling were sealed crates labeled as industrial materials. Inside them were vacuum-sealed bricks, uniform, weighed, logged, cocaine, methamphetamine, synthetic opioids. By the time the count reached federal command, the numbers stopped the room. $1.1 billion in narcotics, hidden beneath an oil executive's estate, and the tunnel kept going. Because this wasn't just storage. It was the backbone of a drug network that had been hiding behind energy, money, and political access. And before sunrise, the people who believed their power made them untouchable would learn how wrong they were. By 2:31 a.m., the tunnel stopped being a single discovery. It became a map. Federal engineers marked the walls as teams advanced, tracking distance, slope, and branch points. The corridor didn't just run straight beneath the estate, it split. One branch angled toward a secured vehicle bay. Another curved deeper underground, reinforced more heavily, built to carry weight over distance. This wasn't a smuggler's shortcut. It was engineered logistics. At 2:44 a.m., agents breached a steel door at the end of the deeper branch. Inside was a staging chamber the size of a warehouse, climate-controlled, brightly lit, and meticulously organized. Pallets were stacked in precise rows. Each crate was labeled with alphanumeric codes that matched shipping manifests seized upstairs. The labels didn't point to Texas. They pointed overseas. Financial records recovered from a control desk tied the operation to a tight group of Indian nationals, operating through shell companies registered in Houston, Dubai, and Mumbai. On paper, they were import-export consultants, refinery equipment brokers, and logistics advisors. In reality, they were the architects. At 2:57 a.m., ICE agents secured a second chamber that confirmed it. Inside were encrypted phones set to international time zones, ledgers written in a mix of English and Hindi, and routing schedules aligned with Indian-operated shipping intermediaries that moved industrial components through U.S. ports. This wasn't local trafficking muscle. This was foreign coordination embedded inside American infrastructure. Above ground, arrests began quietly. At 3:06 a.m., 2 Indian logistics coordinators were detained in a guest residence on the estate. Both fully dressed, laptops open, attempting to wipe drives as agents entered. One asked immediately for an attorney. The other asked if the tunnel had been found. They already knew the answer. At 3:14 a.m., a third coordinator was taken into custody in the estate's operations office, where he had been monitoring freight schedules tied to oil service contracts. His work badge gave him access not just to the estate, but to multiple regional fuel depots, access that had never raised suspicion. By 3:29 a.m., ICE field offices confirmed parallel detentions in Dallas and Houston. 2 more Indian nationals tied to the same network were arrested at commercial offices registered as energy consultants. Servers were seized mid-transfer, bank accounts frozen in real time. Inside the tunnel, agents uncovered something that shifted the case again. A secondary exit shaft. It didn't surface on the estate. It surfaced miles away, beneath a leased industrial yard connected to an oilfield services contractor. The tunnel wasn't just hiding drugs, it was feeding them directly into legitimate freight lanes. By 3:47 a.m., Federal Command confirmed the scope. This wasn't a cartel renting land. It was a foreign-run logistics network using an oil executive's estate as cover, infrastructure, and protection, moving narcotics at a scale that required international coordination and political silence. And the silence was about to end. Because as dawn approached, the arrests were no longer confined to one property. They were spreading across the state, across industries, and across borders. By day 2, the case crossed a line federal prosecutors don't ignore. It wasn't just a narcotics operation anymore. It was a foreign-coordinated logistics network operating inside U.S. critical infrastructure. Just after midnight, the first indictments were unsealed. The list was long. The charges were heavy. 14 primary defendants, all identified as Indian nationals, were charged with operating a continuing criminal enterprise, international narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to abuse U.S. infrastructure for illicit distribution. They weren't couriers. They weren't muscle. They were planners. According to court filings, the network had been built over years through legitimate-looking import-export firms, refinery equipment consultancies, and logistics brokers. On paper, they serviced oil and gas operations. In practice, they moved narcotics using the same routes, vehicles, and permits. The oil executive's estate wasn't chosen at random. It offered cover. At 7:42 a.m., federal agents executed synchronized arrests across 3 states. In Houston, 2 senior coordinators were detained at a glass-front office registered as an energy advisory firm. In Dallas, another was arrested at a hotel while attempting to check out early, his phone already wiped. In New Jersey, ICE agents detained a financial intermediary arriving from overseas, carrying encrypted drives and prepaid access cards linked directly to the tunnel's freight schedule. By midday, 9 defendants were in federal custody. The remaining 5 were detained through coordinated international holds pending extradition proceedings. The tunnel evidence made the case airtight. Inside the underground chambers, agents found routing software that synchronized oil service shipments with narcotics movements, ensuring that inspections were avoided by design. The system used legitimate energy contracts as camouflage, timing shipments during periods of high industrial traffic. Protection wasn't violent, it was bureaucratic. Financial records showed the scale clearly. Over $1.1 billion in narcotics had moved through the network, laundered through layered accounts tied to logistics firms operating across multiple jurisdictions. No single transfer looked criminal. Together, they told a different story. By 3:18 p.m., federal judges denied bail to all defendants already in custody, citing flight risk, international coordination, and the magnitude of the operation. Several were transferred to high-security federal detention facilities reserved for transnational crime cases. Behind the scenes, cooperation began. One defendant agreed to provide full access to offshore accounts and shell company structures in exchange for reduced sentencing exposure. His testimony confirmed what investigators suspected. The tunnel wasn't a backup route, it was the main artery. By nightfall, federal agencies briefed energy regulators, port authorities, and transportation oversight bodies. Quiet alerts went out. Permits were flagged. Contracts paused. The protection that had kept the operation invisible was gone. And for the first time, the people who believed distance and legitimacy made them untouchable were facing the same reality as every other defendant in federal court: concrete walls. federal numbers, time measured in decades. By the time sentencing hearings began, the illusion of power surrounding the estate had completely collapsed. The oil executive's name no longer appeared on donor lists or advisory panels. It appeared on forfeiture documents. Federal prosecutors laid out the case in brutal detail. The tunnel schematics, the routing software, the financial trails stretching from Texas to overseas accounts, the testimony from cooperating defendants who explained exactly how the system was built, protected, and monetized. The court didn't treat it as a drug case. It treated it as an infrastructure crime. The first sentence landed hard. The lead foreign logistics architect, identified in filings as the operational controller of the network, received life in federal prison. No parole. The judge cited the scale of harm, international coordination, and deliberate exploitation of U.S. energy systems. 2 senior coordinators followed, 42 years, 39 years. Each sentence stacked mandatory minimums tied to international trafficking and continuing criminal enterprise statutes. Cooperation reduced none of them below decades. Then came the financial engineers, the men who had moved money through oil service contracts, import-export shells, and consulting firms. They received 25 to 30 years each, with asset forfeiture orders that stripped them of everything tied to the operation, every account, every property, every shell company. The oil executive himself stood before the bench last. Prosecutors didn't accuse him of handling drugs. They didn't need to. The evidence showed he had knowingly provided land, access, and protection in exchange for profit and influence. The sentence reflected that. 35 years in federal prison, plus total forfeiture of the estate, associated companies, and all assets tied to the tunnel's construction and use. The estate was no longer a home. It was evidence. Federal crews dismantled it piece by piece. The tunnel was mapped, documented, and then collapsed under supervision, filled with reinforced concrete to ensure it would never be used again. The underground chambers were sealed permanently. The narcotics, all $1.1 billion worth, were destroyed following evidentiary review. Gone, not rerouted, not delayed. Gone. By the end of the week, all primary defendants were in federal custody, facing sentences that ensured they would never return to their former lives. Appeals were filed, none succeeded. The protection network that once relied on legitimacy, distance, and money was erased in courtrooms, not shootouts. And the message echoed far beyond Texas. Power doesn't hide crime. It records it. In the months that followed, the case stopped being referred to by its headline. Inside federal agencies, it became known simply as the estate, a reference point. Briefings circulated quietly across departments outlining exactly how the network operated, how a foreign-run logistics group embedded itself inside legitimate U.S. energy infrastructure, how wealth and political access were used as insulation, and how a single underground tunnel became the backbone of a billion-dollar narcotics pipeline. What shocked investigators most wasn't the engineering. It was the patience. The tunnel hadn't been rushed. It was constructed in phases, each expansion hidden behind routine oil field development permits. Inspections were passed because nothing looked unusual on the surface. Paperwork was clean. Contractors were legitimate. The drugs moved beneath it all, unseen. Once the system was exposed, similar operations didn't wait. Across Texas and neighboring states, energy-adjacent properties were quietly audited. Ground surveys expanded. Permits were re-reviewed. In several cases, projects were abandoned overnight. Shell companies dissolved. Executives resigned without explanation. The ripple was immediate. At ports, import-export firms linked to the indicted Indian nationals were flagged for enhanced screening. International financial transfers tied to logistics consulting firms were frozen pending review. Several extradition proceedings quietly moved forward overseas. Inside federal prisons, the consequences became permanent. The men who had coordinated the network were transferred to long-term facilities reserved for transnational criminal enterprises. Restricted movement, limited contact, no special treatment. The oil executive who once hosted political fundraisers now counted time in years, not dollars. There would be no return, no reduced sentence that mattered, no assets left to reclaim. The estate itself was repurposed under federal seizure authority, its land reclassified, its structures dismantled or repurposed. The tunnel, once a symbol of hidden power, was sealed forever beneath concrete and steel. And the drugs? $1.1 billion worth of narcotics never reached the streets. That was the number prosecutors emphasized most. Not the tunnel length, not the property value, not the names involved. Impact. Because the most dangerous systems aren't the ones that look criminal. They're the ones that look respectable. This case didn't end a cartel. It exposed a method. Hide behind legitimacy. Move through infrastructure. Buy silence instead of fear. And when that method was finally understood, it didn't survive contact with evidence. If you want more investigations like this, stories where hidden systems are dismantled, assets seized, and sentences are real, subscribe now. Because the next tunnel won't be under an estate. It'll be somewhere even fewer people think to look.